smash. A crystal shard skitters across the galley floor as blood beads on stainless steel. Major Tom Bennett staggers back, eyes widening, his prize heirloom watch face exploding in a spider web of glass. Passengers gasp. Some freeze, phones already raised, before the cabin door slides shut on their stunned faces. 30 seconds earlier, the first-class cabin of Flight 317, Boston to Orlando, feels serene. Soft jazz hums through discreet speakers, overhead bins click into place, and a muted amber glow bathes leather seats. Major Tom Bennett steps aboard in his Marine Corps dress blues, crisp, impeccable, metals polished to a mirror shine, and offers a respectful nod to the flight attendant. His wrist bears a sleek silver watch, unremarkable at first glance. Yet tucked beneath that dial is a tiny red button. A direct line to every major news network, the FAA, and an elite veterans emergency channel. No one outside a handful of Gulf War Gold Star members even knows it exists. Tom moves deliberately down the aisle. A young woman in 2B glances up, phone half raised, curiosity flickering in her eye. He returns her glance with a calm, almost gentle smile, then lowers his arm. Watch face now concealed beneath the cuff of his uniform. He reaches seat 2A and slides in, folding the photograph of a fallen comrade into his lap. The image, faded at the edges, shows two Marines shoulder to shoulder on a desert patrol. One alive, one lost forever. Tom's fingers linger on the picture before he tucks it away, eyes tracing the cabin toward the galley door. Nearby, a businessman in a gray suit types furiously on his laptop, oblivious to the decorated veteran beside him. Tom's gaze shifts to the flight attendant, whose gaze already lingers on his uniform, then to the gate agent, who had scanned his pass too slowly, too skeptically. A calm voice crackles overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical hold. We'll be airborne momentarily. Thank you for your patience." Tom gives a curt nod, but inside every muscle hums with readiness. He knows that once that red button is pressed, there will be no smooth climb to cruising altitude. Only a rapid descent into chaos and accountability. He brushes at the watch's edge, feeling the slight indentation where the secret button resides. Outside his window, the runway lights stretch into the night like a river of fireflies, waiting to guide the plane into the sky or pull it back to Earth. Tom's breath steadies. In this hushed cocoon of leather and light, he carries more than medals and memories. He carries the power to call out injustice at 30,000 feet. What would you do if a single press could expose the truth to the world? He slides his hand, fingertips brushing that hidden button. The cabin holds its collective breath, unaware that the most powerful action of the evening has yet to come. Tom settled into seat 2A with a quiet gravity, the soft click of the buckle echoing in the hushed first-class cabin. He unbuttoned the left breast pocket of his Marine Corps dress blues and drew out a faded photograph. The edges were curled and creased by time. Two young Marines standing shoulder to shoulder under a desert sun. Faces alight with camaraderie. One of them was Staff Sergeant David Ramirez, his closest friend in the 1st Marine Division. The other was himself, younger by 30 years and less burdened by loss. He studied that photograph the way a reader returns to a favorite passage, searching for comfort in familiar words. David's grin was wide, the kind of easy smile that came before dawn patrols and long convoys through sandstorms. Tom remembered the cold bite of morning air, the clank of gear straps, and the dull roar of engines as they rolled out of the compound. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back in Kuwait. Scent of diesel oil heavy in the air, the horizon a mirage of heat. Fumbling only slightly, he tucked the photo back into his pocket and smoothed the ribbon of the Purple Heart pinned above it. That medal had replaced his own uniform decorations more often than he liked to admit. It bore the scar of that firefight in Fallujah when shrapnel tore into his thigh and left him grateful for a second chance at life. Next to it gleamed his Bronze Star and Combat Action Ribbon, tokens of survival in the face of ambushes, of the weighty honor of serving alongside men and women who trusted him with their lives. At 68, his hair was more salt than pepper, trimmed close by military regulation. His back was straighter than most men his age could manage, testimony to decades of training and discipline. Years of carrying wounded comrades off the battlefield had forged a steel in his spine that neither time nor pain could bend. Yet beneath that posture lay an undercurrent of grief he carried like a second uniform, heavy, unspoken, an intimacy he shared only with the photograph tucked close to his heart. A soft chime from the galley door pulled him out of his memories. The flight attendant moved on, offering menus and warm towels. Tom asked for water, black, no ice. He didn't need distractions, he needed clarity. His journey tonight was not for leisure, but for remembrance. In Orlando, a gathering of Gulf War veterans would honor the 20th anniversary of Operation Desert Shield. Gulf Warriors Reunion, they called it. He'd been invited to speak, to tell stories of courage and sacrifice. He would speak, but first he needed to carry these memories intact from one coast to the next. He placed his hands, one over the other, on his lap. The texture of the uniform fabric was crisp, cool against his fingertips. He flexed the leatherneck eagle globe and anchor pin on his collar, the emblem of his identity long after civilian life had begun. He was a warrior, yes, but he was also a man who had outlived many of his own. David was one of them. A hush fell over the cabin as the captain's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cleared for takeoff in just a few moments. We thank you for your patience." Tom nodded curtly, respect for protocol ingrained like muscle memory. Beyond the window, runway lights stretched out in neat lines, promising speed and altitude, an ascent that would lift them out of the mundane world and into the realm of quiet reflection. He glanced at the businessman beside him, engrossed in spreadsheets. Tom wondered if the man knew his neighbor was a decorated Marine Corps officer, a veteran of 2 wars. He doubted it. Civilians seldom saw beyond the uniform, rarely grasped the weight beneath it. That anonymity suited Tom fine. He had no interest in applause. His service had never been about recognition, but about duty. Duty to country and duty to comrades who had fallen. He leaned back, eyes drifting to the ceiling vents and overhead bins. He remembered the desert skies of Iraq, the way dust storms turned day into dusk, the silhouette of a Humvee against an orange sky. He remembered the laughter around campfires, brief respites of normalcy under star-studded nights. Most of all, he remembered David's voice calling out a warning, and then the flash of an IED ripping through the convoy's flank. Tom had crawled through molten metal and black smoke to drag him clear, only to watch his friends slip away in his arms. A cold gust of air swept down the aisle as the flight attendant opened the forward door. She passed him a warm towel and offered a soft, "Thank you for your service." Tom inclined his head, meeting her gaze. For once, he accepted the gratitude without the usual reserve. It was a small balm to a scar that never fully healed. He wiped his hands and exhaled slowly. There was a whisper of fear in his chest, the kind that comes when grief and honor intersect. He thought of David's daughter, Samantha, now in college and carrying on her father's dream of public service. He carried her hope as faithfully as he carried his own medals. Tom reached inside his jacket and laid a hand on the hidden red button of his service watch. It belonged to a brotherhood of Gold Star Marines. Only they knew its purpose. It was a direct line to every major news outlet and to an emergency veterans network. It was never meant for times of peace, yet tonight felt like such a time. The reunion was a celebration of life and loss, but he was prepared for what might come next, prepared to stand up for respect at 30,000 feet if necessary. He closed his eyes and pictured the hall in Orlando where old friends would greet him with salute and embrace. He pictured the flags lining the stage, the applause, and the hush as he took the microphone. He would speak of valor and of compassion, of memories that must never fade. Yet he also knew that memories alone were insufficient to keep injustice at bay. That was why he sat here, with grief in his pocket and power on his wrist. His flight attendant approached with a note. She laid it in his palm, nodded, and moved on. He unfolded it, a simple itinerary for the Gulf Warriors reunion, with his speech time highlighted in bold. Beneath it, in a different ink, a single line: "Be ready." Tom folded the note and tucked it into his pocket next to the photo of David. His heart thudded with quiet resolve. This flight would carry him toward both remembrance and reckoning. He adjusted his cuff one more time, brushing the watch's face until he felt the slight dip of the hidden button. As the engines roared beneath them and the plane surged forward, Tom settled in for the climb. He stared out the window at the runway lights disappearing behind him, taking the memory of David with each foot of ascent. The journey ahead would demand both courage and discipline, the very virtues he'd honed through decades of service. And somewhere beneath that calm facade, a promise gleamed. He would honor every fallen comrade, and if injustice struck, he was ready to answer the call, on the ground or in the sky. In the quiet of first class, Tom Bennett carried the weight of war and the hope of justice. His next act would speak louder than any medal ever could. Major Tom Bennett stepped off the jet bridge into the cavernous terminal at Reagan National Airport and paused, taking in the soft glow of overhead lighting and the gentle bustle of travelers. It was late. Most flights had already departed, and the lounge chairs stood half empty. A few families clustered near the windows, staring at taxiing aircraft, while business people dragged rolling suitcases toward distant gates. Tom adjusted the strap of his duffel bag and straightened the creases in his Marine Corps dress blues. The medals on his chest reflected a quiet pride: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Combat Action Ribbon. To him, they represented memories of courage, loss, and comradeship. But tonight, those medals were just another uniform. He approached Gate A-17, where Flight 317 to Orlando flashed on the digital display. A slim gate agent, no more than 30 years old, sat behind a counter stacked with boarding passes and promotional pamphlets. As Tom stepped forward, she glanced up, her expression polite but unreadable. "Good evening, sir," she said, voice courteous but detached. "Good evening," Tom replied, extending his boarding pass. She took the card and scanned it with brisk efficiency. Once, twice, her eyes flickering to his uniform and then back to the screen. The scanner beeped, but she hesitated before returning the pass. Tom noticed the slightest narrowing of her eyes, as if she were solving a puzzle. "Everything seems in order," she said, handing back the card. "Enjoy your flight." He nodded, offering a brief "thank you," and started down the jet bridge. But the moment he passed her, he caught her eyes drifting toward him again. Behind him, a group of white passengers in business attire moved through without a second look. They eased past the counter, as though the lane were theirs by birthright. No extra scans, no hesitations, just an unspoken assumption that they belonged. Tom's jaw tightened. He didn't protest. His years of military discipline told him not to, but the sting of suspicion burned bright. They saw a man in his late 60s with silver hair and medals, and somehow still found reason to question him. As he reached the door to the aircraft, another attendant opened it, offering a polite smile, but even she seemed to register his uniform with a hint of surprise, as though confirming what she'd already been told by the gate agent's furtive glance. He pressed on, focused on keeping his composure. Walking down the narrow jet bridge, Tom recalled a conversation from his last deployment. A fellow Marine had said, "You never really get rid of the uniform. Even when you're off duty, it's still on your back. Tonight, that truth felt heavy. His uniform should have commanded respect, not more scrutiny. He thought of his friend, Sergeant Ramirez, back when they laughed over cold sea rations after patrols. Ramirez didn't judge people by skin color or age. In the desert, they judged each other by trust and skill under fire. Here, in a climate-controlled terminal, suspicion was brewed from prejudice rather than necessity. At the aircraft door, Tom presented his pass once more. The flight attendant gave it a quick nod and motioned him inside. He stepped onto the plane, took a deep breath, and scanned the cabin. First-class seats were plush. Ivory leather hugged cushioned frames, and soft mood lighting bathed the aisles in a warm glow. A young couple sipped champagne near the window. A middle-aged man pecked at his laptop. Everyone seemed content, except Tom. He moved past row 1 and paused just before row 2, letting a stewardess pass with a cart of refreshments. His reflection in a polished metal panel showed calm eyes, set jaw, and the slight raise of an eyebrow. He didn't want to be the difficult passenger, but he also refused to be invisible. He settled into seat 2A, buckling in and slipping a small handkerchief into his lap. There was a hush as the cabin doors closed behind him. The engines roared to life, and the aisle lights dimmed. Tom looked down at his uniform, at the medals he'd earned defending his country, and then out the window at the dark runway stretching like a ribbon of asphalt. He felt the vibration under his feet as the plane began to taxi. Every muscle in his body held the memory of standing at parade rest, of moving with precision under orders. Yet inside, a quiet storm of frustration and resolve gathered. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. Have you ever walked into a room and felt every eye silently judging you? Share just one word in the comments, we'll read them together. He pictured the comments already forming. Yes, often, unfair. That small interaction would crease the viewer's mind, connecting personal experiences to his story. As the aircraft rolled toward the runway, Tom closed his eyes for a moment. He breathed in and out, letting the rhythm of the engines guide him back to focus. He wasn't here to argue in a terminal or protest in a gate lounge. He had a hidden mechanism for justice, a red button on his service watch. But tonight, he would wait. Instead, he allowed himself to observe how families whispered, how cabin crews smiled at some but not others, how privilege sometimes masqueraded as habit. He didn't flinch when the flight attendant at the front gave him a cursory once-over. He simply watched, learning the patterns of subtle discrimination in real time. Above him, overhead bins clicked shut. He could feel the anticipation in the cabin, a kind of collective breath held until departure. He reached for his pocket and touched the fabric covering his hidden trigger. The button lay flat beneath his skin, a promise of swift action when needed. But for now, Tom sat in stillness, gathering every detail, letting the tension build. Below the cabin's soft hum, his heart beat firmly, measured, patient, ready. He would not be judged at first glance, not when he had the power to rewrite the scene, but he would choose his moment wisely. The engines spooled up. Lights danced across the wing. The cabin tilted back against the roar as they accelerated. In that surge forward, Tom felt the shift, from observer to actor. The next encounter would not be so easily brushed aside. He pressed his watch face gently, feeling the indentation of the red button beneath his finger, but he held back, wanting every witness to be fully present when it activated. As the plane lifted off into the night sky, Major Tom Bennett settled in for the climb. In the passenger seats around him, stories of hurried vacations and business trips unfolded, but in his mind, a single truth echoed. Respect isn't assumed, it's demanded by actions, sometimes hidden, sometimes visible, and somewhere beyond those cruising confines, the next chapter of his stand was already taking shape. He would not let prejudice frame his journey without answer. Tom had only just settled into 2A when the galley door slid open and Karen Whitfield appeared. She was the picture of corporate efficiency. Immaculately coiffed hair, navy uniform pressed to a crisp edge. But her smile was a thin veneer, strained at the corners. "Good evening, sir," Karen said, voice polite but cool, as though she were greeting a stranger at a grocery store rather than a decorated Marine Corps veteran. She held out her hand for his boarding pass. Tom offered it without a word. He met her gaze, steady, unflinching, while she studied the card. She paused, longer than protocol warranted. Her eyes flicked from the boarding pass to his uniform and back again, as if expecting him to be someone else entirely. Tom felt the weight of her scrutiny. The unspoken question, "Do you really belong here?" "First class is this way," she announced, nodding toward the front cabin with clipped courtesy. But her tone carried something darker, skepticism laced with entitlement. He noted the slight tilt of her chin, the way her lips pressed together before she forced that rehearsed smile. Tom slipped past her, pausing long enough to glance into her face. He caught a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, at seeing his medals, or maybe annoyance that a man in dress blues had dared to board without fanfare. Either way, it felt intentional, like a silent challenge issued at 30,000 feet. He eased into his seat and buckled the belt. Karen hovered nearby, clipboard in hand. In that brief moment, Tom could almost feel the cabin's temperature dip. Passengers trading glances, sensing the tension. He pressed a handkerchief into his lap, smoothing the fabric with fingers that flexed in quiet indignation. A young couple in 2B whispered behind a champagne flute. A businessman in 1C raised an eyebrow as though he'd tuned into a private conversation. Tom didn't react. Military training had taught him to hold his posture, to let his uniform speak louder than words. "But sir," Karen said, leaning in just a fraction too close, lowering her voice so that only he could hear it, "we've had some difficult passengers in first class." Tom met her eyes. "I assure you, ma'am, I know my seat assignment." Her lips twitched. "Of course," she said, straightening abruptly. She glanced around, then added loud enough for the nearest rows to hear, "Please make sure your electronics are in airplane mode." Tom lifted his hand where the service watch lay hidden beneath his cuff. "Yes, ma'am." She backed away, clipboard clutched to her chest, as though he'd been holding the wrong weapon all along. Her dismissal felt deliberate, a reminder of her authority and the cabin hierarchy. Yet Tom's heartbeat remained steady. He surveyed the cabin, the soft curvature of leather seats, the glow of overhead lights, the gloss of polished metal tray tables. All of it seemed charged now, as though the very air would crackle if anyone so much as whispered the wrong word. A co-pilot's voice drifted through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We should be in the air momentarily." Most passengers relaxed, shifting in their seats or leaning back with a polite sigh. Tom stayed upright, eyes forward, mind alert. He recalled the bronze star pinned on his chest for actions taken under fire, moments when split-sec resolve had meant the difference between life and death. Someone in the row behind him snapped a photo with a phone. The flash was muted but unmistakable. Tom caught a glimpse of the camera light reflected in Karen's soft smile as she walked away, as though she were the heroine of her own story. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling the sweltering heat of a desert patrol, the sound of distant mortars, the handshake of a platoon sergeant after a successful mission. There, he had never been judged by his uniform. There, he had been judged by his conduct under pressure. Here, in this cabin, he was judged by appearance and assumption. He opened his eyes and let out a slow breath. The cabin lights above flickered, routine, but in his mind it signaled an opportunity. Karen had made her stance clear. First class was a privilege, and to her, he was an interloper. Still, Tom felt no anger, only the calm clarity of purpose. He would not rise to the bait. He would let events unfold, and then he would act. Every witness in the cabin would see what happened next. His hand brushed the watch at his wrist. The hidden red button rested just beneath his skin, a silent promise of intervention. But timing was everything. He would wait for the next move, confident that when the moment came, no forced smile or clipped comment could withstand the truth. A murmur rippled through the cabin as the engines roared to life. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and Karen returned with a final checklist. She passed him once more, offering an apologetic nod. Tom met it with a small, almost imperceptible smile of his own, an acknowledgement that he too knew exactly what was coming. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Tom settled back into his seat, mind sharpening. Above the roar of liftoff, he whispered to himself, "Show your hand when the time is right." First class might have its rules, but Major Tom Bennett had a different agenda. And the real test, one that even Karen Whitfield couldn't anticipate, was still ahead. The cabin's gentle hum felt distant the moment Karen Whitfield stepped into Tom Bennett's personal space. He had just settled the overhead bin door with one hand and was reaching for a magazine when she appeared, clipboard in hand and lips pressed into a tight line. "Sir," she said, her tone low but cold, "you'll need to remain seated until we reach cruising altitude." Tom's brow furrowed. He'd complied without question so far, shown his ticket, respected her authority. But this blanket command came with a glare that made him feel anything but safe. "I understand," he replied evenly, "but I need to adjust my position." Her jaw tightened. Before he could finish, she shoved him with both hands. The force was deliberate, more than necessary to maintain order. Tom stumbled sideways, his elbow catching on the stainless steel edge of the galley wall. A sickening crack echoed through the cabin as glass fragments sprayed across the aisle. His pocket watch, his father's heirloom, polished through decades and combat tours, shattered under the impact. Time stopped. Tom's breath caught in his throat. Crimson welled around the cut on his wrist, staining the crisp cuff of his dress blues. For a heartbeat, he stood motionless, the world narrowing to the cold metal beneath his fingers and the hot sting of pain. Passengers gasped, some rising from their seats, all eyes drawn to the scene unfolding. A mother clutched her child, her lips moving in a silent prayer. A businessman dropped his briefcase lid, the sharp clack punctuating the tense hush. Even Karen paused, her clipboard lowered as she realized the gravity of what she'd done. Tom reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a white cotton handkerchief. His fingers trembled ever so slightly as he pressed it against the gash, blinking back a rush of anger that threatened to sweep him away. This wasn't just a mistake. It was assault on trust and courtesy. "'Kay, Karen,' he said, voice steady despite the ache. "You just pushed me into that wall." She opened her mouth, perhaps to apologize, but found no words. Instead, she glanced at the shattered watch face on the floor, cracked glass spiderwebbing outward from its center. The family heirloom that had ticked through every milestone of his life lay broken, its red button dislodged. Whispers rippled through first class. Phones emerged, cameras trained on Tom's blood-stained cuff and on Karen's ashen face. He pressed the handkerchief harder, willing himself to remain calm. 30 years in the Marines had taught him that an unchecked reaction could escalate a situation beyond repair. Moments stretched. Karen's shoulders drooped as she realized the plane, her domain, had become the very arena for the injustice she'd tried to impose. A flight attendant from row 1 hurried forward, eyes wide with concern. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Tom nodded, glare shifting to his fellow attendant. "I'm fine," he said softly, though the pain burned deeper than the wound. But this was unprovoked. The attendant reached for the intercom handset. Tom quickly shook his head. He didn't want to broadcast pain, yet. Not until he'd gathered every witness, every camera angle, every detail that could hold the airline accountable. He straightened, gripping the seat back for support, then sat down. Red droplets dotted the pure white leather of his seat. Each one felt like a testament, proof that he'd been targeted, that uniform and valor meant nothing to someone blinded by prejudice. Karen stood by the galley doorway, arms crossed, voice brittle. I thought you were causing a scene." Tom met her gaze unwavering. "The only scene here is your assault." Heat rose in Karen's cheeks. Shame or anger, it was hard to tell. She didn't respond, instead retreating toward the front of the cabin, leaving passengers murmuring and cameras clicking in her wake. Tom unwrapped the handkerchief and placed it firmly around his wrist. The fabric soaked up the blood, but it wouldn't soak up the memory of this moment. Nor would he let it wash away the evidence. He glanced at his watch, now useless beyond its shattered face, and felt a pang of loss. Yet that irreparable act was exactly what he needed, undeniable proof that his call to justice would not be contrived. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The flight attendant who'd offered help was now checking on his neighbor, helping her settle an upset child. Tom allowed himself a quiet sigh, gathering his composure. This was only the first blow in a larger struggle, and he intended to see it through. Passengers settled back, some shaken, others whispering about what they'd witnessed. No one tried to hush the click of phone shutters. No one silenced the rapid tapping of keys. In those 100 or so pairs of eyes, Tom saw solidarity flicker. They were witnesses now, living proof of an act of violence born from bias. He exhaled slowly and flexed his fingers. Each nerve ending throbbed, reminding him of the cost of courage. But he felt no regret, only resolve. When the time came, he would reveal the full extent of Karen's misconduct, and the airline's response would echo beyond this cabin. The intercom crackled as the captain announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're investigating an onboard incident and we'll update you shortly." Tom allowed himself a small, ironic smile. He had no intention of being hushed by protocol. He would press on, handkerchief concealing the blood but not the truth. He returned to his seat and allowed the attendant to adjust his armrest. Then he leaned back, eyes forward, mind sharpening. Around him, first class exhaled. But in his heart, Tom Bennett was just beginning to hold that breath, ready for the moment when he would unleash the quiet power on his wrist. The moment the glass of Tom Bennett's heirloom pocket watch cracked against the galley wall, the cabin erupted into action. Phones whipped out of pockets and purses, their tiny LED lights pulsing as passenger after passenger fumbled to start recording. Tom pressed a crisp white handkerchief to the gash on his wrist, the fabric instantly blooming scarlet. He smelled the metallic tang of blood, cool and bright, and tasted adrenaline on his tongue. Every line in his uniform felt amplified, the sharp fold of his Marine Corps dress blues, the gleam of his combat action ribbon, the weight of his Purple Heart. Around him, a dozen smartphone cameras captured the scene from every angle, some close enough to catch the reflection of his own surprised face in the shattered glass. A woman in row 3 reached over her seat back, whispering into her phone, "He's bleeding. She just shoved him." A man 2 rows back shouted, "Keep rolling!" Tom's breath stayed steady. He'd faced far worse under fire. Surprise raids, mortar barrages, the sudden flash of an IED. But he had never been on the receiving end of disgrace in uniform. And he would not let anger overtake him now. He stabilized his arm against his body, folding his free hand over the wound. The flight attendant who'd tried to help earlier knelt beside him, concern etched across her face. Tom offered a slight nod, then lifted his voice so the cabin could hear. "I did not touch her," he declared, each word measured and calm. The hush that followed was more powerful than any outburst. In that instant, every witness in first class understood there was no ambiguity, no question of who was the aggressor. Smartphones stilled for a beat, then resumed clicking. The memory cards recording not only the wound but the dignity above it. A teenage girl leaned forward, her phone trained on Tom's uniform. Beside her, an elderly couple exchanged worried glances, the husband's lip trembling. The couple 2 rows back whispered among themselves. "He's a hero, God bless him." Tom set the handkerchief aside and reached into his jacket pocket. With deliberate care, he removed his business card, Colonel Tom Bennett, U.S. Marine Corps, and held it aloft. "If you're recording this, please share the truth," he said, voice firm. "No edits, no cuts. Let them see exactly what happened." In response, the cabin's atmosphere shifted. It wasn't voyeurism anymore, it was collective resolve. A soft murmur of agreement rose, like the opening notes of a national anthem. He secured the handkerchief around his wrist, knotting it tightly enough to stem the bleeding, but loosely enough to keep his fingers free. The wound throbbed, reminding him of the cost of this stand, pun not lost on a man who had paid far more for his country. From the corner of his eye, Tom caught Karen Whitfield's reflection in a polished armrest. She stood apart, brow furrowed, clipboard abandoned. Her uniform felt suddenly heavy, her authority eroded by every frame of video being uploaded in real time to social media. Tom tilted his head, meeting her gaze without malice. "You'll have to answer for this," he said quietly, but loud enough for passengers nearby to hear. "Every viewer will want to know why you chose violence over courtesy." Passengers around him nodded, some offering supportive smiles. The flight attendant finally reached across his aisle and pressed a paper towel into his hand. Tom accepted it with a solemn nod, then folded it and pressed down on the wound for a moment longer. Above the din of recording, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're aware of an onboard situation. Please remain seated. We'll provide more information as soon as possible." Tom closed his eyes for a second, recalling the Gulf War's humid nights when mortar fire was the primary intercom. This was different. No hostile territory, just prejudice cloaked in protocol, but he recognized the pattern. Attack first, apologize later. He would see to it that the apology came with accountability. He opened his eyes and sat upright, every sense attuned. The cabin lights dimmed further for takeoff, but the glow from recording screens was brighter than any overhead lamp. The faces in the aisle shimmered in that light. Witnesses to truth. He tapped out a brief message on his phone. "Incident on flight 317, evidence secured. I did not provoke. To be." Then he hit send to a trusted aide at the Pentagon. Within seconds, he knew his superior would mobilize channels to track every recording, every eyewitness account. Behind him, a young man typed comments into a live stream chat. "Justice for Bennett," and "He kept his cool." The hashtag started climbing. In minutes, newsrooms would pick it up. Tom allowed himself a small, private exhale. This was only the beginning of the fallout he intended to harness. The cameras had done their work, now the systems of power would follow. He dropped his phone into his jacket pocket and offered a nod to the attendant beside him. "Thank you," he said, voice low but genuine. "Let's make sure this stays on record." She nodded back, steely determination in her eyes. Tom knew then that he was no longer alone. In that cabin, everyone had become a guardian of truth, shielded by the simple act of clicking record. As the engines spooled for takeoff, Major Tom Bennett leaned back, wrapped in a quiet confidence. His wound throbbed, a reminder of sacrifice. But the cameras kept rolling, and reaching beyond the cabin's walls, lighting the path toward justice. The cabin fell into a peculiar hush as Major Tom Bennett settled back into his seat. His fractured watch face lay discarded beside him, an artifact rendered useless by Karen Whitfield's shove. But beneath the shards of glass and crumpled metal, the watch still held its secret. A recessed red button, nearly flush with the casing, waited for his command. Tom flexed his fingers, feeling the slight indentation beneath his skin where the button lived. 30 years in the Marine Corps had taught him that timing and precision mattered more than brute strength. He inhaled slowly, letting the ambient glow of first class wash over him. Around him, passengers exchanged concerned whispers, their phones still raised. The stewardess knelt beside him, offering water and gauze, but Tom declined with a firm shake of his head. He looked out the window at the runway lights receding as they climbed, then back at the row of faces turned toward him. This was no ordinary emergency. He needed every witness to see the truth unfiltered, every camera, every eye, every soul on this plane. With a steady thumb, he pressed the red button. Instantly, a nearly silent hum pulsed through the watch as its nano camera behind the glass crystal powered on. A live feed ignited, broadcasting direct to major news networks and the Veterans for Justice emergency channel. Simultaneously, a coded distress signal flashed to FAA headquarters in Washington and to the nearest Air National Guard base. Tom watched as his phone buzzed. An automated confirmation. Signal received. Flight 317 emergency intervention requested. In the cockpit, the captain frowned at the sudden red alert on his console. What the? He spun around, reaching for the intercom. Back in the cabin, Tom kept his composure, pressing a finger to his lips in a silent appeal for calm. His voice remained measured when he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have activated an emergency protocol. A ripple of confusion washed through the seats. A middle-aged woman clutched her husband's arm. A teenager lowered her phone, puzzled. Soft murmurs rose, then fell as they realized something bigger was unfolding. On the main screen toward the front, the airline's entertainment system flickered. Instead of the scheduled route map, static gave way to Tom's uniformed form. Wrist held aloft, cuff rolled back. His voice, calm but resolute, announced, "This flight has witnessed an act of assault and discrimination against a uniformed veteran. We are returning to Reagan National Airport for a full investigation." The cabin's collective breath caught. Some passengers stared in disbelief, others cheered softly. Even Karen Whitfield froze at the front, her clipboard dropping to the floor with a sharp clatter. Moments later, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Folks, this is your captain. We've been instructed by FAA control to make an immediate return to Reagan National. Please remain calm and await further instructions." The engines, which had begun their ascent, now reversed thrust. The plane's nose dipped, banked gently, and the familiar tremor of retreat rippled through the cabin. Passengers gripped armrests. A baby wailed in row 5. Through it all, Tom sat tall, eyes steady, embodying the dignity he'd maintained through wars and peace alike. In Washington, controllers at the FAA Operations Center scrambled. Red alerts flashed on screens as the signal from Tom's watch pinged their systems. Simultaneously at Andrews Air Force Base, an alert officer recognized the emergency code reserved for veterans' distress. All hands stand by, flight diversion in progress. Back in the cabin, a stewardess refastened a fallen magazine stand. "Sir," she said quietly, leaning close. "Thank you. That was incredible." Tom nodded, offering a small, appreciative smile. He pressed the handkerchief against his wrist, where fresh blood still seeped, and tucked it into his lap. The pain was real, but secondary now. The real wound had been prejudice, and that wound was on display for everyone to see. From his seat, Tom noticed passengers' screens splitting between his live feed and the airline's logo. Social media notifications pinged on his phone without him checking. Shares, retweets, urgent messages from media producers asking for interviews. He let them come, knowing the narrative was now in his hands. The seatbelt sign flashed on again as the plane leveled off, engines throttling back. The captain spoke. "We'll be on the ground in approximately 10 minutes. Please stay seated, with your seatbelt securely fastened." Tom inclined his head, then addressed the cabin once more. "Thank you for bearing witness. Your recordings today matter. For me, and for every veteran who's faced discrimination. When we land, I'll make sure your statements reach those who need to hear them." A man in row 3 raised his phone high and shouted, "We've got you, Colonel." A ripple of applause followed. Tom allowed himself a genuine smile, the first since boarding. He pressed his hand to the button spot beneath his cuff as if feeling its weight once more. The moment had been precise, surgical, quiet, but undeniable. No public relations spin could erase 30 seconds of unedited truth. Outside the window, the runway lights pulsed closer, welcoming them back. Karen Whitfield remained at the galley doorway, her posture slumped, eyes downcast. Tom met her gaze, offering neither apology nor anger, just unwavering resolve. As the wheels kissed pavement and brakes whispered undercarriage friction, Tom's mind raced ahead to the next phases: investigations, media interviews, policy changes. But for now, he allowed himself to simply breathe. He closed his eyes for a moment and whispered, "Mission accomplished." The plane taxied to a halt, doors opened, and the cabin erupted into quiet cheers and murmurs of support. Major Tom Bennett lifted his hand, waved small but confident. Tonight, one press of a button had grounded a jet and launched a reckoning that no spin or apology could undo. The jet came to a halt at the gate amid a flurry of flashing cameras and whispered conversations. Major Tom Bennett remained buckled in his first-class seat, watching as the cabin crew and security officers moved through the aisle with deliberate calm. He could feel every eye on him, the still humming cameras, the breathless anticipation of passengers who knew they were witnessing something historic. A stern-looking man in a dark suit stepped forward, the airline's regional director of customer experience, his badge reading Evelyn Carlton. She carried a leather-bound folder stamped with the airline's logo. Next to her, a junior executive held a stack of brochures offering first-class compassion packages and lifetime priority status. "Colonel Bennett," Evelyn began, her voice measured and smooth. "On behalf of Trans-American Airways, I want to express our deepest regret for what you endured. This was never our intention." She slid the folder across the slim galley counter toward him. "Inside you'll find 5 first-class vouchers per year for the next decade, along with lifetime platinum status. We hope this gesture demonstrates our commitment to making things right." Tom studied the folder without speaking. He watched the polished veneer of corporate goodwill, the gold-embossed letters, the carefully crafted apology letter inside. He placed the handkerchief-wrapped wrist gently on the counter next to the folder, then did something unexpected. He set his shattered service watch beside it, face up so that the red button was still visible through the cracked crystal. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. "That watch is a family heirloom," Tom said softly. "But the real damage can't be repaired with vouchers or a letter. You assaulted me because of my uniform, and half the cabin recorded it. You can't buy back justice." He cleared his throat. "Please understand, Colonel. We see this as a misunderstanding, an unfortunate series of errors. No one intended to discriminate against you. If you could accept our package, we'd like to settle this amicably and get everyone back on schedule." Tom's knuckles whitened around the counter's edge, He felt a quiet fury rise in his chest, an anger born of decades serving his country only to be treated as a nuisance in the air. His voice was calm but resolute. This wasn't an error. It was a choice you made. He tapped the watch with one finger. That button on my watch reached your boardroom hours ago. By the time you landed, your stock had plunged nearly 7%. You're not worried about inconvenience. You're scared of accountability. The gathered crowd stirred. Passengers pressed their phones closer, eager for every word. The man who'd tapped record in row 3 nodded, eyes bright with admiration. Evelyn exhaled, her professional composure wavering. "Colonel," she started again, voice tighter. No, Tom interrupted, shaking his head. "I will not be placated with half-hearted gestures." He took a step back, returning his watch to his wrist, the red button now hidden beneath his cuff. "I want a full, public apology. I want a formal statement acknowledging that what happened to me was assault, discrimination, and a violation of federal regulations, and I want a commitment to retrain every member of this staff on dignity and respect, starting with the people who nearly cost me my life." Silence fell. The terminal beyond the jet bridge echoed with the distant hum of trolleys and the chatter of other passengers. But here, at the gate, time seemed to stand still. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the folder, then to the broken watch. She swallowed. "Very well," she said after a long pause. "We will issue a formal statement. We will review our policies and conduct mandatory retraining, and we will ensure a full investigation of this incident." Tom nodded once, satisfied that his demands had pierced the corporate facade. He turned to face the cabin, where sympathetic faces watched and cameras continued to roll. "Thank you," he said, voice soft but carrying. "That's a start." As he reached to exit the aircraft, a young flight attendant quietly handed him a fresh towel to clean the blood from his uniform. Tom accepted it with a nod of gratitude, then stepped into the jet bridge. Passengers followed, murmuring words of support that trailed behind him like echoes of justice. In the terminal lounge, Evelyn Carlton and her team gathered around the counter, staring at the empty seat where Tom had sat just minutes before. The folder lay open, its contents scattered: vouchers, apology letters, priority cards. But at its center, the broken watch face stared back, a silent testament that real reconciliation could never be wrapped in gold. Outside the window, TV crews filmed the unfolding reaction. Tweets and posts already displayed headlines like "Veteran holds airline accountable" and "One push that grounded a jet and exposed discrimination." Tom Bennett had walked off the plane with more than personal vindication. He'd ignited a movement that no corporate apology or glossy brochure could contain. And as he made his way through the crowd, people shook his hand, patted his back, and thanked him for standing firm. The price of silence had been too high. The price of speaking out was just beginning to be paid. By the airline, and by everyone who believed respect was a right, not a privilege. By the time Major Tom Bennett stepped into the terminal lounge, his story had already leapt off the airplane and into the world. Within minutes of pressing that red button, the nano camera in his shattered watch had streamed live footage of the shove, the bleeding wrist, and his calm assertion, "I did not touch her," to every major news outlet and social feed. In the lounge's cafe, a barista flipped open a tablet to catch the replay. There was Tom, unwavering in his dress blues, blood spattering a white leather seat. Behind him, the flash of phone cameras. Above him, Karen Whitfield's stunned glare. The barista let out a low whistle. "That's your Marine Corps right there," she muttered. On social media, the hashtag #GroundByValor exploded. It trended within 30 minutes. Users shared slow-motion clips, annotated screenshots, and heartfelt captions, "Never mess with a hero, valor on the wing, shame on the airline." In retired officers' forums, threads popped up honoring Tom's restraint under unjust attack. In civil rights groups, posts urged boycotts unless the airline delivered real change. By midday, Falcon Airways' ticker had turned crimson. The stock, buoyed by last quarter's strong earnings, began a sharp descent as investors reacted to the PR crisis. A 7% drop wiped out nearly $700 million, 0 cents, in market capitalization in a single session. Financial news anchors dissected the numbers live. A stunning reversal for Falcon Airways, whose share price is now down to levels not seen in months. Analyst projections now factor in potential fines, retraining costs, and consumer backlash. Meanwhile, veterans organizations issued official statements. The Marine Corps League saluted Tom's courage and urged airlines to adopt zero-tolerance policies. The American Legion called for federal oversight of passenger treatment. Civil rights leaders, from national chapters of the NAACP to grassroots advocates, praised Tom's measured response and demanded a full reckoning. Tom sat alone at a corner table, nursing a black coffee and checking his phone. Notifications buzzed, interview requests from cable news, private messages from fellow veterans, alerts from his Pentagon aide confirming that the Department of Transportation had opened an inquiry. His heart swelled at the solidarity pouring in, but he allowed himself only a quiet nod. He reflected on every camera that had turned toward him, every passenger who had borne witness. That network of citizens behind their lenses had become an unstoppable force. He thought of the mothers and daughters watching at home, women aged 55 to 75 who treasured dignity and fair play, and felt their collective support like a warm tide lifting him. A notification chimed, drafting policy change memo for airline board. It was from a friend in the Civil Rights Division of the DOT. Tom tapped out a brief reply. "Thank you. Let's ensure this isn't just talk." He sipped his coffee and scanned the airport's megascreen, where a financial ticker scrolled updates. Falcon Airways 7.02%. Passengers paused to read, exchanging glances that said, "That just happened." Tom tucked his phone away, folded his hands, and allowed himself a faint, assured smile. Tonight, the ripples of his single act would reach far beyond the gates of Reagan National. Thousands of videos, articles, and tweets were amplifying a simple truth. Respect is non-negotiable, and no uniform, no matter how polished, should ever be questioned without cause. As he rose to board the shuttle to his hotel, Tom knew this wave of justice would keep rolling, long after the evening news faded to black. And in his heart he carried the quiet confidence that real change, once set in motion, could never be undone. Tom woke to the soft glow of his phone on the hotel nightstand. A breaking news alert flashed on the screen. Veterans' private medical records leaked amid airliner incident. Questions raised about PTSD. His heart lurched. He tapped the notification, bringing up a story that quoted an anonymous source claiming he'd been under psychiatric care and prone to hallucinations. He sat up, eyes stinging. The cafeteria's quiet hum outside his door felt miles away. Images of therapy sessions, those sterile rooms and clinical questions invaded his mind. He remembered the knot in his stomach when he first checked in, admitting that war had left scars unseen beneath his uniform. He'd trusted that record to remain private. His hand trembled as he scrolled comments beneath the article. Maybe he overreacted. This is what happens when vets can't handle stress. Why call generals instead of using proper channels? The implications cut deeper than any physical gouge. The man who'd faced insurgent fire was now under assault by rumor and innuendo. He rose and paced the small room, pinching the bridge of his nose. Every loop of doubt felt like barbed wire tightening around his chest. The same public that had cheered his courage now questioned his very sanity. He felt the sting of betrayal, from the airline that leaked his files, and from the media that ran the story without context. His phone buzzed. A text from Sergeant Phillips, his aide. "Everyone here supports you, sir. Don't pay attention to the noise." Tom exhaled, but relief dissolved when he noticed no further replies. The group chat had gone silent, his fellow veterans reluctantly stepping back, wary of association. He opened another message, an alert from his daughter Aisha. "Dad, people at school are sharing that article. They say I'm from a crazy family." His chest tightened. He'd shielded her from danger on the battlefield, but this smear invaded their home life. He stared at the text, shame and anger mingling in his gut. Danielle, his sister, called next. Her calm voice trembled with worry. "Tom, I'm so sorry. I wish I could help." He forced a small laugh. "It's not your fault. They're trying to rewrite everything I stood for." But even as he said it, the doubt flickered. Had he been reckless? Had his fight done more harm than good? A notification from Lieutenant General Harrison blinked. "They're playing dirty. Legal and PR teams mobilized against you. Brace for more leaks." Tom's jaw clenched. The man whose voice had grounded the plane now warned him of a darker campaign. He felt the weight of every unnamed attorney and paid consultant circling to tear him down. He sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. The uniform he'd worn with pride felt like armor too heavy to carry. Memories of dusty foxholes and long patrols felt distant, now replaced by a sense of isolation deeper than any desert night. He had hit the lowest point. In the silence, he heard his mother's voice. "Stand tall when it matters, Tommy." That refrain had propelled him through firefights. He clung to it now, against this unseen enemy. He wiped a hand across his eyes and reached for his phone. This fight had begun with a shove at 30,000 feet, and it wouldn't end in whispers of doubt. He opened his draft memo to counsel, a plan to expose the airline's leaks, to demand accountability from the DOJ, to rally veteran groups publicly once more. His fingers danced over the keys, forging a counterstrike of truth, backed by legal action and first-hand testimony. Rising, he donned his dress blues again, medals gleaming in the soft hotel light. They bore the weight of real service and sacrifice, not gossip and smears. He straightened his posture, feeling the same calm resolve that had guided him from the cockpit to the cabin. As he stepped out into the hallway, Tom glanced at his reflection in a mirror. The lines on his face told of battles both won and painful. His eyes were tired but clear. He had fallen before and risen again. This was no different, only another front in a campaign for justice. With measured steps, he headed toward the hotel restaurant. Where reporters might be waiting, he would face them head-on, truth in hand. The storm of defamation had gathered its darkest clouds, but he was determined to push through the downpour and stand in the light. In the days following the airline's forced retreat, Tom Bennett found himself surrounded not by solitude, but by solidarity. It began with a message from Master Sergeant Terrence Jackson, a retired Marine who'd once served under Tom in Fallujah. Jackson's text was simple: "I've got your 6. Call me." When Tom returned the call, Jackson's gravelly voice brimmed with urgency. He had something to share. An email chain from within the airline's training division. That evening, Tom sat in a quiet conference room at the hotel, the folded printouts spread before him. Jackson pointed out directives instructing cabin crews to apply greater scrutiny to any passenger matching certain suspicious profiles. Profiles thinly veiled descriptions of non-white travelers in premium cabins. The memo's author, a mid-level operations manager, had detailed plans for behavioral profiling designed to minimize liability, not to protect passengers. Then came the pilot's affidavit. Captain Richard Stevens, who had flown the very flight in question, agreed to go on record. "I witnessed the way Colonel Bennett was singled out," his statement read. "We were trained unofficially to flag and question certain passengers before boarding. I refused to participate after that incident." His words carried the weight of 18 years in the cockpit, and Tom felt the compassion behind each typed line. Next, a young flight attendant named Maria offered her testimony. She had downloaded internal chat logs showing crew messages riddled with derogatory jokes about those people who think they belong up front. Her screenshots painted a picture of systemic bias, messages dismissed by management as harmless banter, never disciplined or removed. With that evidence assembled, Tom felt a surge of purpose. The betrayal of trust, a veteran assaulted in uniform, was no longer an isolated act. It was the symptom of an ingrained policy. His hand trembled only slightly as he gathered the documents. In that moment, he was not alone, but part of a network of truth-tellers. He reached out to Elijah Montgomery, the civil rights attorney who'd offered to represent him pro bono. Over a secure video call, Montgomery reviewed the evidence and nodded gravely. "This goes beyond personal injury," he said. "We have grounds for a class action suit." Tom agreed without hesitation. He filed his discrimination lawsuit the next morning, naming both Karen Whitfield and Trans-American Airways as defendants, and demanding corporate accountability, policy reform, and a court-supervised diversity training overhaul. Word of the suit spread quickly. Headlines proclaimed, "Veteran Fights Back and Shadows of Profiling Exposed." But beyond the press, Tom heard from veterans of all branches. They shared their own stories of being questioned or dismissed, of uniformed service that meant nothing to strangers. In emails and calls, they offered resources, shared legal contacts, and even organized support rallies at airline offices. On the day the lawsuit was filed, Tom stood outside the federal courthouse in full-dress blues. The morning sun caught his medals as he addressed a crowd of reporters and fellow veterans. He spoke of honor, courage, and the duty to defend not just the country but the values it stood for. Behind him, a line of supporters held signs reading, "Respect all who serve," and "Justice in the skies." As the doors of the courthouse closed behind him, Tom felt a renewed sense of hope. The allyship of fellow service members, pilots, and airline employees had rekindled his faith in collective action. Together, they had turned a single act of violence into a catalyst for transformation. In that unity, Tom found his strongest weapon, the unwavering voice of justice, amplified by a community unwilling to stay silent. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of the Senate Transportation Committee hearing room, illuminating a long mahogany table where Colonel, now Brigadier General, Tom Bennett sat in full dress uniform. His medals caught the light. The Purple Heart glowed like a beacon, the Bronze Star ribbon a solemn stripe across his chest. Around him, veterans and civil rights leaders lined the gallery, their presence a living testament to the issues at stake. Senator Eleanor Washington, chair of the committee and no relation, rapped her gavel. "This hearing will come to order," she announced, her voice firm and measured. "We are here to examine allegations of discrimination and assault aboard Flight 317 and to determine what legislative remedies may be necessary to protect passengers in our nation's skies." She turned to Tom. "General Bennett, you have endured a personal violation in uniform, yet you stood your ground. Please recount your testimony for the record." Tom rose, posture immaculate. He spoke succinctly, recalling the shove, the shattered watch, and the emergency protocol he'd activated. Each fact landed with precision: the blood on his cuff, the dozen cameras in the cabin, the FAA order to ground the aircraft. The room was silent, every word absorbed. When he finished, applause rippled quietly through the gallery. Senator Washington nodded. "Thank you, General. I'll remind our witnesses that we swear under oath to tell complete truth." Next, the CEO of Trans-American Airways, Richard Dalton, took the witness chair. He wore a dark suit that seemed to swallow the light, his tie askew in nervous anticipation. Dalton cleared his throat and offered a prepared statement about the company's commitment to inclusion, but his carefully chosen words rang hollow against the evidence already before the committee. Senator Washington held up a copy of the leaked internal training slides. "Mr. Dalton," she said, voice unyielding, "is it your testimony under oath that your airline does not instruct staff to profile passengers based on race or ethnicity?" Dalton swallowed. "Senator, our official policy is behavior-based security screening." "But this slide," she interrupted, "signed by your own director of training, describes heightened awareness for passengers matching specific demographic descriptions. How do you explain this?" Dalton's face paled. He glanced at his counsel, then back at the senator. His voice faltered. I was not aware of that document. It was part of an outdated program that should have been discontinued." "Under oath," Senator Washington pressed, "you confirm that these discriminatory practices will be dismantled immediately?" He nodded, defeated. "Yes, Senator, we will terminate those procedures, retrain all staff, and establish an independent review board to oversee compliance." A murmur of satisfaction rippled through the visitors' gallery. Tom allowed himself a small, relieved exhale. This admission was a watershed moment. More than apologies or vouchers, it was a public renunciation of a culture that had allowed prejudice to fester. Senator Washington turned to the committee. "Based on the testimony before us, I will introduce legislation requiring all commercial airlines to adopt transparent anti-discrimination audits, publicly report bias complaints, and subject policy changes to FAA approval. We cannot allow one veteran's ordeal to be dismissed as an anomaly." Committeemen nodded in agreement, some scribbling notes, others leaning back with thoughtful expressions. A representative from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division stepped forward to testify that a federal inquiry was already underway regarding potential civil rights violations and document destruction charges. His brief statement underscored the gravity of systemic misconduct. Throughout the hearing, cameras captured every reaction. Tom's calm confidence, Dalton's growing discomfort, senators charting a new course for policy. For once, the performative veneer of corporate spin gave way to raw accountability. At the hearing's close, Senator Washington addressed Tom directly. "General Bennett, your courage in standing up for your rights, and for all passengers, has led us here today. This committee will recommend these reforms, and I will personally shepherd them through the Senate." Tom rose again. His voice was steady but warm. "Thank you, Senator. I fought for my country because I believed in its promise of equality. I stand here today because I believe that promise must extend to every flight, every cabin, every fellow citizen." The room broke into genuine applause. Tom felt a swell of emotion, not pride in personal victory, but gratitude for collective action. Outside the hearing room, reporters queued at microphones, flashing lights capturing the aftermath. He walked past Dalton's retreating shoulders, earning nods of respect from airline employees who had chosen to testify against their own company. On the steps of the Capitol, Tom turned to face cameras one last time. A news anchor's hand reached toward him with a microphone labeled C-SPAN. The general spoke clearly. "I stand confident that today's outcome proves one thing. When truth is recorded and witnesses refuse to stay silent, justice will follow." As he strode away, veterans fell into step beside him, their presence a shield of solidarity. In his heart, Tom knew the road ahead. Legal battles, policy wrangling, cultural change would not be easy. But the hearing had seeded hope that American skies could become a space of genuine respect for all who board. For the audience in homes across the nation, the story of Flight 317 had transformed from a shocking injustice to a symbol of accountability, and for Tom Bennett, silent hero of First Class, it was validation that standing firm can initiate real, lasting change.